Hello, and welcome back to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'm joined today by our president, Father Boquet. Welcome to the podcast, Father.
Well, Colleen, as always, a great blessing to be with you again.
It's wonderful to have you here in the studio. And today we're going to be talking about IVF. And I'd actually originally planned on us talking about IVF because your Spirit in Life last week was on IVF and Bishop Burbage's statement about it. And then Trump went and signed an executive order
Mm.
expanding access to IVF. So it just made this conversation all the more urgent. So before we dive into talking about the morality of IVF and why it's wrong and what other treatments there are for infertility,
Mhm.
could you just give our audience a little explanation of what IVF is?
Sure. So for those that are unfamiliar, here we're going to speak about a husband and wife
Mhm,
because we know that we can obtain a donor egg, donor sperm. But let's
mhm,
just kind of use here, speaking about a husband and wife who's struggling with infertility,
mhm,
that pursues the procedure, the technique of in vitro fertilization. So what it would be is, taking the sperm from the husband, taking an egg that has been aspirated from the woman, and then in a petri dish, combining both sperm and egg together to conceive a child. And then once that conception has occurred, taking that embryo and then placing that embryo into the fallopian tube
mhm,
of here in this case the wife,
mhm.
who then with the hope that the now embryo, the new human life, would migrate its way to the uterus, implant, and life would grow forward, and eventually we have the birth of this child.
Yes. And this technique of bringing about births has been around since I believe the first birth was in, let me see, 1978. And since then it's gained popularity, especially in I think the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, especially as more and more women are struggling with fertility because infertility issues have also risen in the past 50 years. And interestingly enough, the first live birth from IVF, apparently the procedure was financed on the revenue from abortions.
Mhm.
So I thought that was a really interesting fact because this process is very closely connected with the abortion industry.
Correct. And
So,
we can talk about that.
yeah, I was going to say, let's jump into the reasons that IVF is immoral. So, there's basically three from my understanding. There's the fact that it's going against the dignity of marriage and the conjugal act, it's getting rid of the conjugal act, it is commodifying a child, and then it's also often there's abortions needed or embryos die. Is that correct?
Right. So with the third, so basically, if we think about, there could be where only one egg
Mhm,
is in conception occurs with
mhm,
one egg with the sperm, but in most cases, it's multiple eggs
mhm,
that are opportunity for conception occurs. Multiple embryos, I guess, is what ultimately would want to say is that are now created
mhm,
and generated in this situation using in vitro fertilization, and then in some cases, obviously multiple embryos could be implanted in the fallopian tube. Multiple implantations conceptions could occur. And as a result, they could selectively choose one out of the many. They can also, in a sense, in that situation where even before they do, an implantation, basically, place some of the embryos into a frozen state, use them from experimentation. So there's many things that go with that number three that
mhm,
the church has great concern about. All of it relates back to the second you mentioned, which is the commodification of a child.
mhm.
And that, is really the underlying issue that we're treating human life, and we're treating the conjugal act as things to be manipulated by using techniques that we have now learned in scientific advancements. So it's really it has many complexities that
Mhm,
most audiences that are talking about this are who are hearing the topic brought up in social media or in
mhm,
mainline media, even from the executive order, going,
mhm,
well, aren't we for life? Aren't we, for the conceiving of life? Don't we need more children in this world? So forth and so on, without looking at the very underlying reasons why we should not be going this direction to resolve some of the questions of infertility and a demographic problem.
yeah, exactly. And there's this underlying implicit idea that couples have a right to a child.
Right.
Could you explain for our audience why that's not true?
Right. So in Donum Vitae, it speaks very beautifully of this, which is a wonderful church document that addresses conjugal love, the marital act,
Mhm,
and addresses the beauty of human life.
mhm,
So in this situation, life is a child is a gift.
mhm,
Creation comes from the Creator. And yes, husband and wife, by giving of themselves, a total self mutual giving of themselves to each other, and as the possibility always of a third,
mhm,
the begetting of a human child. And so the fruit of their love. And so, and that's how God has desired life to come into this world, through the sacred act that we call conjugal love. And so, what happens in the situation here is we're looking at a child as a possession. I have a right to a child. The church is very clear that we don't have a right to a child, and so child is always to be treated as a gift, not a thing. And no matter how much one may, from the natural desire of a child, and let's talk about that just for a second. There's a natural desire for a child and a husband and wife, of wanting, to beget a child, wanting, to grow their family. That's a beautiful gift. And that's what makes this such, as Bishop Burbage said in his pastoral letter, such a tender topic. It's a sensitive topic because, many couples are struggling with infertility. I know we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little while, but so there's a natural desire. But even in that natural desire, one doesn't mean I have a right to a child. And what happens if I have a right to a child, then it also means I have a right to the means I can choose in order to beget that child.
Mhm.
And so in IVF, so if I have a right to a child, then here is a scientific technique, a technological advancement I can use to obtain my end. But we can never choose something that is evil in order to bring about a good.
Mhm.
And so here we're using something that in itself violates conjugal love, violates the sacredness of the marital union. It violates the way in which a child is to be begotten, to be welcomed, and the fact that the child has a right to be gotten in that mutual self-giving,
Mhm.
not by a technician, not in a petri dish, not in some sterile lab somewhere. So
Mhm.
these are the kind of things that do not get spoken about.
Well, it also has like profound impacts on the child. Like I saw a video on social media just today of this woman about my age who was conceived in IVF and her sister was as well. And she was just like it was interesting because she was clearly not coming from a framework of IVF is wrong. It was more of just looking at the reality that she was conceived in IVF and her sister was and her parents still had frozen embryos. And she was thinking about the fact that she's like I was meant to be the big sister. But the only reason I'm the big sister is because some technician somewhere chose me to be implanted first, and then my family, because she and her sister were conceived at the same time, so they'll jokingly call each other twins,
Right.
and she was just, like, thinking about that, and then also thinking about the other frozen embryos and basically saying, "I wonder what a brother, like, the boy version of, like, me and my siblings would have been," and
Right.
anyway, I thought it was a very interesting and profound, like, this is the reality of children
Right.
that are born to IVF.
But it brings up a key point, and that is that the church also, when referring to children, to people begotten through this
Mhm,
technique, is that these are still children of God, and they're still to be respected and to be always, for in themselves. And I think that gets also somehow lost, because people immediately, some or in many cases, will leap. What does that say about my child? What does it say about my daughter, my son? So the church is also very clear here, and it's always good to interject that as we have our conversation, because we never want to give an impression, in any of those situations, that because that's the first thing that comes up in so many people's minds when they hear, quote, the church's concern and the church's negative approach toward this, in the sense of how people perceive it as negative. But it really is the church advancing a great good. And these beautiful children that have been conceived in this way are children of God and
mhm.
have equal dignity to a child that was conceived in the conjugal act. So it's good to keep that always in our forefront as we having these kind of conversations, so that we never lose sight of it. Because again, people will sometimes be very critical of the church without understanding what the church actually teaches.
Amen. Could you talk a little bit about how IVF hurts the parents' marriage? Because in the pro life sphere, a lot of people responding to President Trump's recent executive order are focusing more on the fact that there's frozen embryos, many embryos die, and the more association with abortion of IVF. And I
Right.
think it's important to also keep in front of people that it impacts the couple's marriage.
Right. So the one of the first things, one of the first arguments that you hear the church, speak about is it harms the marital union, and why? And because we have to go back to again, what is the design that God has established,
Mhm,
and so just the natural, design that God has created between a man and a woman,
mhm,
in their union, their physical body union, and
mhm,
so in their physical union of a gift of self, him giving himself to her, her to him, and also both giving what only each one can give. And that is, he donates sperm, she donates egg. and that the marital union, which it bespeaks of their union, that
Mhm.
one flesh, they become one flesh, and as a fruit of that union,
Mhm.
always with the openness to the other, the third, the potentiality by this union
Mhm.
that a third, a child. So in a sense, the couple is already thinking of the child, already thinking of the possibility of this child. And so the child is part, if you will, of that understanding that as we unite, as we give ourselves to each other in this marital embrace, that there is always the possibility of the fruit of our love being the begetting of a child. And so the church upholds that great good. And so in this situation, where should the child be conceived? Within the womb, and within her body, where conception should occur. And so not outside of her womb. And
Mhm.
so, and also the child has a right to be conceived in that natural environment where a child is to be begotten. So the church really is promoting and upholding some great goods that doesn't get spoken about.
Mhm.
And in a way, again, the commodification of the child is part of that, because if I am treating the child as a thing to be possessed, and they won't use that kind of language, of course,
No.
but that ultimately we're talking about, and through in vitro fertilization and some of the other scientific techniques, and if I may put a comma there, it's not because we have artificial technologies where the problem lies
Mhm.
itself in itself. It's, we have to judge the morality of those techniques. And in this situation, we have a technique, in vitro fertilization, that violates the intrinsic nature that is within the marital act.
Mhm.
There's a meaning within that act that's violated by in vitro fertilization. And so instead of assisting the couple, which is the language of donum vitae,
Mhm.
helping the couple to achieve their end through the marital embrace, assisting it, right? It replaces it.
Mhm.
And so in a sense, it treats, the process of conception as a manufacturing process, kind of, so there is a great violation here. And so though the end, people look at the end, well, isn't the end the same, the begetting of a child? Again, the means by which we choose to obtain that end are what we are judging here. And in
Mhm.
vitro fertilization, as with other technologies that are available, that are morally illicit, they're never permissible because they violate intrinsic goods.
Mhm. I think you've already answered this question, but I want to ask it anyway because sometimes when talking about IVF, people will bring up the most conservative um possibility, the most conservative scenario of what if you were to take one sperm and one egg from a married couple, create a child and implant it, no embryos are frozen, no embryos are killed. Would that be moral?
No, because you still, the means by which you are choosing to obtain that end are the same, whether you
Mhm.
have one or whether you have 10. But remember what I said in the beginning is that there could be where there is only one egg
Mhm.
and sperm from the husband that are brought into that petri dish. So there are no other embryos, only one egg.
Mhm.
And so, but it still means it's wrong. So
Mhm.
one or five or 10 don't change the intrinsic the issue that has been violated, the intrinsic good of the marital act.
Well, and I also want to bring up here, we've been talking about a married couple who's struggling with infertility, which is, of course, the hard case.
Right,
And I think it's just important to kind of note for the audience that they always use the hard case to kind of get something through the door. And it's obvious looking at the way IVF is used in our world now that it's often used for surrogacy or for homosexual couples that want to be able to have a child. And so just it's easy to like think about IVF in the context of, oh, we want these married couples who are struggling with infertility to be able to have a child and let the emotional argument
right,
sway you towards IVF. And
right,
first of all, like you just said, that still would be wrong. But second of all, it's so often just used in abusive situations
right,
or in situations that are just a really bad environment for a
right,
child to grow up in, being separated from their mother and
right.
not being raised by their surrogate mother.
Well, and also the story you mentioned earlier that you heard, in that situation, again, I don't know the particulars because I don't
Mhm.
know them,
Neither do I.
but in the situation, if you have a donor egg,
Mhm.
donor sperm. So it might be the biological mother or the biological father, but there's a donor that they may never ever know. So
Mhm.
you, in actuality, don't even know your mother, your biological mother,
Mhm.
in a sense of the one who donated the egg.
Mhm.
It might be your mother that's through marriage, all
Mhm.
right, that is the one where the egg has been implanted, all right, and has given you birth, but she really is not your biological mother, all
Well,
right?
and there's stories of people getting the embryos flip-flopped at the IVF clinic too, and couples giving birth to a child that they
Right,
thought was their
right.
biological child, and it's not.
So when you look at all those various situations that can emerge, what pull back again, what
Mhm,
are some of the goods that are violated? The right of the child,
mhm,
the child has a right to be begotten by its own biological parents, to
mhm,
be welcomed in the womb of its own mother, to be nourished within that womb through the gestation of those months, to be born by their own mother, and to be welcomed with that embrace of their own mom and dad.
mhm,
And that's why, again, what Bishop Burbidge is talking about in his passion, which primarily is what my article was on, using
mhm,
it as a way of talking about these great goods and thanking Bishop Burbidge. Like many other bishops, and many are addressing these great goods. you know and so it's important because we're looking at, what are the rights of the child, what are the rights of the mother and father, and what doesn't always get spoken about with in vitro fertilization, again, which the church through Donum Vitae and many church documents are upholding, that there is a bodily, right, in a sense that,
mhm,
that the husband has a right, in a sense, that his child be conceived by
mhm,
his wife, and the wife has it, in a sense, that the egg, the sperm that comes to be able to beget the child, comes from her husband.
mhm.
And so you look at these relationships. So it's not just, kind of, we're not talking about a contractual relationship.
Yeah.
IVF is a contract, in a sense.
Mhm,
We're speaking here of conjugal love. We're speaking here of covenantal relationship. Very different language. And so it's these are great goods. That's why we speak of them of intrinsic meaning. There's something
mhm.
within themselves that is being violated by certain acts like IVF.
Yeah.
And so this is why the church is very strong. She's unchanging in this. And this is what, really is concerning to me. And being in the pro-life movement for a good chunk of my life, and having been engaged in the bioethical debates, especially serving HLI now for 14 years, that, you see what happens when we start promoting something, thinking it's a good,
Mhm.
when it's not a real good, when we're trying to resolve genuine dilemmas. And
Yes.
the issue of infertility is a dilemma, and
Mhm,
it is great pain to many people, couples. And just, if I may put one more comment, then I'm gonna toss it back to you, Colleen, and that is, you brought it up, and that is, Donum Vitae makes it clear, that the issue that, that not that the child, that we think about all what's happening through IVF today and through surrogacy, it's
mhm,
opened up the door where same-sex couples, a child can be generated,
mhm,
and then this child can be given to this child, a couple, man, man,
mhm.
woman, woman. But also it opens up to the violation and exploitation of women around the world for surrogacy.
Yeah.
So there's so many things that are engaged in this, and that feed this industry. It's an industry,
Yes.
and it's a
Yeah.
very lucrative industry. And what I said in the article, and here's my ball pass back to you, is it preys preys upon the vulnerable.
Yes.
It preys upon their emotional feelings, and the desire, natural desire, for a
Mhm.
child between a husband and wife.
Well, and that's just why I wanted to put a flag there is that we see this we see it on abortion, we see it on all of these different issues that they start with a hard case and then they open the door to anything. Anything goes. And it's a pattern that once you know it's there, you start seeing it in all these different areas.
Right,
So I just kind of wanted to highlight that for our audience that just a little okay, this is how it's being used for IVF. Now how is that same idea, that same concept been used for everything else under the
right,
sun?
exactly.
Um Let's move on to talk about Trump's executive order.
Sure.
So he signed his executive order last week expanding access to IVF. Could you explain for our audience what it says?
Fundamentally, what he's dealing with, he's given a period of time, and
Mhm.
if I remember correctly, it's about 90 days,
Yeah,
where
I think
he's
so.
looking for some feedback. He's looking for some possibilities of how to approach it. What is science? What is the medical community saying? How would this kind of move forward? What could we
Mhm.
do as the federal government? So he's asking questions at the same time, wanting to see it move. So it's not
Mhm.
just, what happens in 90 days. He gets all the negatives. Well,
Mhm.
okay, we're not going to go forward. He's been very clear, sadly,
Yeah.
that he wants to support this.
Well, he was asking for policy recommendations, I
Right.
believe. And I am really glad that my understanding is that pro-lifers will be involved in that conversation about what are the policy recommendations. So hopefully this is a chance for
Right.
pro-lifers to make their voices heard on this and
Right.
say, this is not, there's other things you can do
Right.
to help couples like get over, not get over, help couples overcome infertility
Right.
that don't involve IVF.
Right. And I'm hoping, I mean, I'm with you, and I think that, there are many people that are engaged in this conversation.
Mhm,
It's been very clear, that President Trump is very open to dialogue,
mhm,
to consider options, to look at options, and
mhm,
it's all going to be, I guess, who is the one presenting these various policies or maybe recommendations within the medical community. Giving surveys. What's been the research. Because I mean, it's not just going to be obviously people saying, well, how do we make this part of insurance? Which
mhm,
that was not said there, but I know that's going to come up.
mhm,
And so these are the various complexities that are going to have to be dealt with. What I'm hopeful is, as you just articulated, is that there will be a comma, and
mhm,
to really for people that see the larger picture of this, who have dealt with this for many decades, how to bring that to the president's attention.
mhm,
Now, that's going to be done obviously through connections, relationships for other
mhm.
people, but I know that he's open, and I'm hoping that maybe many people will have access to that conversation.
Well, and if you think about it, IVF goes against the Trump administration's goals. Like, one of the main points of his platform was this "Make America Healthy Again," where you have conflicts of interest within big pharma. You should heal the underlying like issues and not
Right.
be stuck in an industry that wants to keep you sick and then make money off of you being sick. So they have a vested interest in never helping you get well and just staying infertile. And
Correct.
Rachel Campos Duffy, who is the wife of Sean Duffy, who's the
Mm,
Secretary of Transportation, she said the other day, "I would much rather." This was her tweet. "I would much rather POTUS, so the president, and RFK spend our money figuring out why infertility in America has skyrocketed, rather than subsidizing big pharma and IVF. We're always treating symptoms rather than the underlying root causes in this country."
right.
And I was like, that is the way to
Right.
bring this to Trump. Is not IVF is morally wrong as much
Right.
as that is true, but what are your actual goals in an administration, and why does this violate these goals that you've set for
Right.
your
Right.
presidency?
And respectful, I mean, there's many more complexities that would brought this to the surface, but
Mhm.
the Alabama case,
Yes.
is obviously what really brought this to the stage,
Mhm.
and has no doubt influenced how the president is responding to the situation.
Mhm.
But like Miss Duffy is bringing up, is has to be part of the conversation. It has to
Mhm.
be looked at, and that's what's not being addressed. Is
Mhm.
why are we seeing an increase in infertility?
Yes.
What are the fundamental reasons for that? What are the systemic reasons for it? And I think what we saw with Mr. Kennedy was how, during the confirmation hearings, was him
Mhm.
addressing health, well-being, and so why don't we start looking at those, and then use money
Mhm.
to help do research, to look at ways of addressing these issues that are
Mhm.
moral, that respect the couple, that
Yes.
respect life. Because as you just said, I think that someone, as I say this, in case someone's listening on the president's team, I am not saying the president doesn't understand this, but the connection to abortion, the
Mhm.
connection to selective abortion, the connection to experimentation on human life, some of the other things he has voiced
Mhm.
that he is not in favor of. Well, this is part of this industry.
Mhm.
And so we need to make sure that those are brought to the attention if
Mhm.
one doesn't know them, if one doesn't see them, that
Mhm.
they're more than just superficial connections.
Mhm.
They are very systemic connections that need to be addressed.
Well, and I was heartened to see that Nicole Shanahan, who was RFK's running mate when he was still running for president,
Mm,
she said that the IVF industry thrives off of you staying sick, infertile, and in the dark about your fertility. And that is so true, that
yeah,
IVF is basically all that's bad about big pharma. It's this idea that we want you to stay infertile, give us money, a lot of money. It's a very expensive procedure, and then we're going to fix this without actually healing the underlying
right,
cause. We're just going to create what
right.
like, the outcome that you want.
And also, as we know, there's no guarantee
No.
that once the implantation has occurred,
Mhm,
that the child will implant and that will see birth.
mhm,
There's many times of where there has been failure
mhm.
for many reasons, and that's in itself is again painful. You
Well,
know,
and it's interesting too because it basically is thriving off of the normalization of birth control that we've already seen. So, if you have a woman who has endometriosis or PCOS, those like there's going to be issues with her cycle really
Right.
at a young age, oftentimes like heavy periods, very painful
Right.
periods, things like that. She'll be given birth control. Birth control bypasses her reproductive system. It doesn't
Right.
heal anything.
Right.
It puts a band-aid on it for 10, 15 years, however long it is between when she goes on birth control and when she decides she's ready to have children. By this point, sometimes she's older, sometimes she's not. She goes off of it. The underlying fertility issue has never been healed. She can't conceive.
Right.
And then the big pharma swoops back in and says, here's IVF. And like, who's benefiting there? And so,
Right.
if Trump really wants to enact this philosophy of make America healthy again
Right.
and be able to actually heal the underlying issues, you're going to start helping women understand their fertility better, heal issues like PCOS and endometriosis like naturally, and then like look at more natural methods to help women conceive.
Right. And also just the very fact that to the president's credit, not
Mhm,
with IVF, but the idea of wanting to see and support couples, to support families, to see the begetting of children. These
mhm,
are great goods. These are great goods. The means by which we're
mhm.
obtaining those ends is where we are in conflict. And
Yes.
so it's important that's why having the right people sit down in those conversations,
Mhm,
it's not squashing everything.
mhm,
The means by which you want to obtain these ends is what is, as I said, in conflict. We
mhm,
disagree on, and that are not good for couples. It's not good for our society, and it exploits couples. It preys on their vulnerability, and because of all the issues we addressed in the very beginning, the
mhm,
exploitation of human life itself. And so, and the commodification of human life, and these are the things that we are dealing with in our society now that have
mhm,
caused great harm. We don't want to see these advanced. So I'm hoping that people, that you've mentioned, Ms. Duffy particularly, who wouldn't have a linkage,
mhm,
through her husband, to be able to maybe be invited to tea, a cup of coffee, sit down and have a conversation. And I'm praying that, many of the people that work in the DC community, in the
mhm,
pro-life movement, who might have greater access, will be able to sit down at the table. I'm even hopeful that because of President Trump's connection to several Catholic clergy, that
mhm,
maybe that'll open a door, maybe for some of the bishops or
mhm.
some of the bioethicists to be invited to a conversation, to really bring all of it to bear.
Well, and I think again, it's really important. Like, if I were the one addressing President Trump, it would be really important to pitch the fact that there are other ways to help
Correct.
couples overcome infertility
Correct.
that are going to be like more effective or at least will heal the underlying issue, like we were saying. And
Right.
so, to help him see that there's other things that will align better with the goals of his administration
Right.
than simply paying
Right.
money to big IVF.
And it's also not just a Catholic issue.
No.
Right, and I think that's important, that because often people will say, "Well, it's just you Catholics." No,
Hmm.
no, it's deeper than that, and it's good that,
Hmm.
again, as you said, I think that's a great way of approachment.
And one thing I am glad about, as much as this executive order is not good,
Right,
is that it has brought the topic of IVF up in the
that's
conversation.
correct.
People are discussing it now. People are finding out the problems with IVF. People are discovering that it
Right,
doesn't work very often, that it's very expensive. I mean, I think people knew it was expensive, but it's also bringing up the fact that 90% of children who are conceived with IVF are killed.
right,
And I think that it was a topic that before pro lifers didn't want to make a big deal about because the more pressing issue at hand was abortion. And if you can't win the abortion issue, it's going to be very hard to win the IVF
right,
issue. And then liberals didn't want to jeopardize their ability for same sex couples to be able to get IVF.
that's
So
correct.
it's just, I'm really glad that it's actually become a conversation that people are discussing now because I think it would have been very easy to just go through the years ignoring it like we have been doing.
Exactly, and even if now let's just play this out a little bit, going back to your one sperm donor, daddy, husband, one egg, mom, wife. Well, what happens if we can eliminate all those other things?
Hmm.
So experimentation, frozen embryos, selective abortion, genetic manipulation. We can start pulling all the things that exasperate this problem, and we get down to that one egg and that one sperm, in the sense, or sperm donated from the dad, from the husband, still would not make it right. And that's important, as this conversation continues, on IVF on the national
Hmm.
level, is that because what happens again is, what if? Well,
Hmm.
it is intrinsically wrong by its very self, in itself. This technique, this procedure that is used in itself is morally illicit. because it violates the intrinsic value of the human person. Come on. So that's the real issue here. So I think as a country, as I said in many of my articles and many times in this podcast, we have to change the tenor of how we approach human life. And because no one has a right to a child is not a thing, right? Child is a gift. And so we have to, who has dignity, inalienable dignity that must always be respected, even before that child is conceived. We have to, that's what I mean by going back to the couple, to the conjugal love between husband and wife, thinking of that child and the begetting of that child by their union. So it's not just sexual intercourse. It's not just an act, all right, that's being performed for just for the pleasure of it all. Pleasure is involved in the giving of oneself to each other. Beautiful, wonderful, but there is something deeper in its meaning that
Mhm.
must be always talked about. And that's the challenge here, and so we have to change the tenor. Abortion is always wrong. In itself, never is it morally permissible to kill another innocent human being by this act at all. And so IVF is never permissible. And there are other techniques, artificial reproductive technologies that are not permissible
Mhm.
for this very reason or reasons. So I think those are the things that we just got to keep tossing up. So it's important for anyone and everyone in this conversation from our side of the aisle to bring that to bear, hopefully, if given a chance, to be with the president or with those that are discussing policy,
Mhm.
discussing, ways of approachment. So that's my hope that that will happen. But I think the other thing too is, as we see with abortion, what are because abortion is never permissible. So in the sense here, so what are some of those ways of approach that are moral?
You just anticipated my question of, like, it's really easy to say, "IVF bad, don't do it." But what are we allowed to do? What are some ways if you're gonna help someone understand, like someone like President Trump, who has this goal of
Right,
wanting to help couples who are struggling with infertility be able to have children? Overcoming infertility is a good. Having a child is a good.
right,
This is a good thing that we have a demographic issue. It's a good thing to encourage couples to have children. What are moral alternatives to IVF?
right. So if we look at it, and you already mentioned several ways in the
Mhm.
sense of, so if we start, what are the possible systemic reasons that may be preventing fertilization to occur, i.e., conception? What are they? So in some cases, it could be, you mentioned endometriosis.
Mhm.
It could be an ovulation issue itself.
Mhm.
How can we address that? It could be the issue of sperm mobility.
Mhm.
It could be an issue that it's not with the wife at all. It could be
Mhm.
very much with the husband himself without knowing. We could be dealing with an erectile problem that
Mhm.
can be dealt with, by use of sometimes drugs, sometimes by surgical procedures. So it's idea of, as you said earlier, what are those health issues? So, that may be preventing the possibility of a conception to occur. And so, in addressing those issues. So for example, we could use some. I have a paper in front of me. So today I came a little prepared because this is such a technical conversation. And the reason why I was flipping pages a while ago, but 34% of these artificial reproductive technologies, kind of backing up, fail.
Mhm. Yes.
Right. So it's important to see that, just someone could be in, and it could be higher than that depending on which particular artificial reproductive technology is being used.
Mhm. And I think
So,
that's generally IVF, and I'm not actually sure about that, so don't quote me on
yeah.
that.
So I know it's in one of our articles, and then
Yeah.
I just, that's why I turned one of the pages where some of
Yeah.
this comes from. But,
The
which,
average IVF live birth rate for individuals using their own eggs is 29%.
right.
So that's even lower.
Right. So here, you can be talking about, the use of hormones to help because there could be some deficiencies. So
Wait, are you talking about positive
back to the
ones?
positive
Okay.
things again. Sorry, I put my comma, my fault. And but these are the things that, that again, true health care. So
Mhm.
again, now what we're talking about
Mhm.
is health care.
Mhm.
Abortion is not health care, right? Killing of a child is not health care, all right? Contraception is not health care when it comes to contra life, right? Right. So that there are uses of estrogen for different reasons that are
Mhm.
non-contraceptive. Those are different, all right? The
Mhm.
choice is different, the act is different. And so, but the idea is those that are choosing to use hormonal contraceptives for the purpose of contraception. It's never permissible. That's not health care. We're
Mhm.
stifling a healthy reason in a sense, which is fertility. Fertility is not a disease.
It's also hijacking your reproductive system, which isn't actually healing anything.
Exactly. So you look at this. So these are the things that we have to look at when it comes, and that's what again I hope our the Secretary of Health and Human Services will be looking at. What is health care? How does this approach? So these are the things that we should be putting forward, as ways of helping couples,
Mhm.
and looking at those other issues that maybe preventing maybe, and this is where the church has talked about, and for those that are interested, and I know you'll put this in the show notes for them, and you linked some of the articles which will have those linkages for them.
Mhm.
So the St. Paul VI Institute,
Mhm.
which will deal with the Creighton model and
Mhm.
natural technology, and there our website will link them. They can understand what all that is. But
Creighton is a fertility awareness program, correct?
correct, right. And so at Creighton University. So you look at, so you have these kinds of ways that are out there,
Mhm.
means that are here that serve to help. Remember, let's go back. Again, just this is so technical, but in a sense, but the idea, getting back to the language of the church.
Mhm.
So to assist the couple.
Mhm.
So again, whatever those reproductive technologies are that we're making reference to, and whatever the techniques that are being used, or the means that we're using even to assist in addressing systemic reasons,
Mhm.
they are to be moral. So the idea is so I'm not going to go down the path because that's a different subject for a lengthier time, but like Viagra, people immediately would jump on that and say, well, you can't use that. Well, that would not be true because I just mentioned it, because it could be an erectile dysfunction, so that there could be the use of a particular drug
Mhm.
between a husband and wife
Mhm.
that could assist, in the marital act.
Before we dive into some specific ways
Mhm.
that are moral alternatives, could you walk our audience through the criteria laid out in Don't Vitae? Because I think that's
Oh,
important to keep
absolutely.
at the forefront of this conversation.
And I brought that with me so that we can break them down because I think it's very important. And so here, just Donum Vitae is a beautiful document that really outlines the church's approach to conjugal love and to the begetting of human life
Mhm.
and the good of human life. All right. And so this is important. And so Humane Vitae that we've talked about, on human life speaks about, again, the marital love, marital embrace, the beginning of children, marriage. So these are great goods. So in Donum Vitae, and I'm going to look down a little bit, so I pause with our audience that look at, and so number one, all assisted reproductive procedures should be performed upon married couples only.
Mhm.
So that goes now to the issue about same-sex relationships, the whole surrogacy issues,
Mhm.
all these type of things violate that first principle.
Or even unmarried couples who want to have a child.
That's right. Single people
Mhm.
who just would like to have a child, And so here we're talking about technologies, medical interventions that assist a married couple. Married couple.
And that doesn't mean that single women shouldn't track their cycles. That's just saying that the assisted reproductive, I just wanted to
Right.
make that
Right. That's perfectly
clarification there because we
right.
were talking about the Creighton model and all of that. It
Right.
is good to know your cycle if you are a single woman because
Correct.
it's a huge health sign.
Exactly.
But what we're going to be talking about specifically, the assistive reproductive procedures,
About
is
marriage.
only
That's
for
right.
married couples.
Exactly. So number two, the wife must contribute the egg and the husband must contribute the sperm. The means by which the sperm is collected,
Hmm.
and just one example would be the use of a perforated condom.
Hmm.
All right. So there was wait, condoms. Wait, hold on, church. Yes, for a contraceptive act. In this situation, a perforated condom is used,
It has holes.
has holes, right? So you're not preventing the possibility of conception naturally, right, through the conjugal act, but you're using the condom as a way of gathering sperm, all right, that some has passed through the condom, but some has gathered and remain in the condom. So that can be used from the natural conjugal act between husband and wife,
Mhm.
right? So the husband must donate the sperm, the wife must donate the egg. So obviously, with that, masturbation is never permissible. So even though we're trying to collect sperm from the husband, the means by which we collect, why? Because masturbation in itself is intrinsically disordered. It is not ordered toward the natural good in which the sexual act or power is to be used, or faculty, the church would teach. All right? So, number four, fertilization must take place inside the woman's body. Inside. All right. So here, and we may have time, but I know you're going to do some
Mhm.
linkages and some show notes for people. So there are techniques that are used to assist in that manner that are morally permissible. All right. And so basically, what we've done there is you're assisting. So you're using techniques that are assisting for the conception to occur within the womb. In vitro fertilization, where does conception occur? Outside of the womb, outside of the body of the woman, of the mother to be, right?
Mhm.
So that's a very important, reality there that gets lost in this conversation because again, people look at the end and
Mhm.
do not consider the means by which they obtain that end. Number five, obviously, we spoke about this in great detail. Embryos are human life. These are
Mhm.
human beings, and to be treated with the utmost of respect. And so, in the case of in vitro fertilization, whether it be one embryo or whether it be multiple embryos, they are never to be experimented on. They're never to be put into a frozen state. And what people don't realize is the vulnerability of that little embryo, obviously at this stage, even within the natural place where fertilization has happened in the fallopian tube, is still very vulnerable. And we know
Mhm.
that from ectopic pregnancies. We know this from other issues. But what happens is they're so vulnerable to air, to water, to the environment around them. So we're already placing, through in vitro fertilization, I'm speaking about here now, and other reproductive technologies that are outside the womb, we're placing the embryo in grave harm, in grave danger, even sometimes with some of the moral means. There is again grave possibilities that could happen even as you're trying to assist.
Mhm.
So these things are very important. We're dealing with human life. So here we're not treating human life as a commodity. We're not commodifying human life. We are
Mhm.
respecting the dignity that is owed to this human life, even at its most earliest stages of development. We're
Mhm.
treating with intent and in act with the great utmost of dignity and care. So why? Because we're not replacing, right?
Mhm.
So the marital act, we're trying to assist. Assisting also means respecting
Mhm.
all the various intrinsic things that are good in themselves. Human life is an intrinsic good, all right?
Mhm.
Must always be respected. And number six is the conjugal act, as I just mentioned, can never be replaced.
Mhm.
It must always be assisted. And, as we might have time, if not, we obviously, again, the links
Mhm.
and the show notes will show this. There are some moral ways of which artificial reproductive technologies can be utilized. And there are some that the church has not yet spoken on, in a
Mhm.
sense, have made a definitive statement about. Many of us in bioethics and have different ways of looking at them. We may disagree. We may actually, and I do advise people not to take advantage of some of these artificial reproductive technologies the church hasn't yet spoken on.
Mhm.
And I've written on this, so people can go back to my own articles. But because why? Because personally, in my own view of looking at them is that it seems to be more of a replace,
Mhm.
but again, because the church has not definitively made a statement, it's within the couple to make that decision.
Mhm.
But it's our responsibility is to educate a couple
Mhm.
on all these issues, helping them to have an informed decision. What
Mhm.
may be moral, okay,
Mhm.
what is never moral.
Yeah.
Very important.
And that's where the principles are helpful too. And just for an example, I don't want to use this as an example of something that's definitely okay, but it's something I think is a helpful kind of mind game since I don't know if this is actually a technology that's like being used right now. I saw a video online yesterday of basically these like little like robotic things that help propel the sperm. And so there was the discussion of okay, if it's happening within the conjugal act, they're just helping move the sperm, they're not replacing it. This conception is still happening within the marital act. There's a possibility that that could be illicit as long as it didn't also then potentially cause harm to the embryo. Like it couldn't accidentally kill the embryo. And that's just a little helpful mind game of something that you might look at and be like, robotic sperm, that's definitely not okay. And well, it might be, but you
Right.
have to like look at all the
That's
different
right.
criteria and see could it meet
Exactly.
that. And I
And
just wanted to use that because that's
no,
not one that has
that's very,
emotional
very good.
charge
Yeah, because I mean, but
connected.
as we're talking about the beginning of human life or the potential of beginning of human life, but we
Hmm.
apply those same principles all across the spectrum of human life
Hmm.
because we're all making decisions in our healthcare, on moral principles
Hmm.
that we should be making our decisions on those moral principles, and so something that is, what are the outcomes? What is this proportionate?
Hmm.
Is this going to be something that's considered, ordinary? Is it
Hmm.
proportionate, disproportionate, extraordinary? There's many
Hmm.
things we do on a daily basis in healthcare that are making moral decisions
Mhm.
on these situations. So here we're just talking about the very, very beginning of human life, or the potential of the beginning of human life.
Mhm.
And so here I would guide people who are not familiar to the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare,
Mhm.
what we call the ERDs. And there you can go to the United Catholic Conference of Bishops website, and you can look up the 6th edition and the 77 principles that are outlined. The
Mhm.
rationale behind those principles are all there. So it's not, the church speaks with a total vision of the human person. And so whether that be at the beginning of life, whether it be toward the end of life. And
Mhm.
so you raise a very valid point, because we don't dismiss something specifically or only based on the fact that it's an artificial reproductive technology or a medical intervention. Church doesn't approach it that way. Could be.
Mhm.
It could be, but it doesn't have to be. There
Mhm.
could be moral means, and we've been talking about some of them, all right?
Mhm.
And so it's important, as we look at that's why the church, principles apply across the spectrum. They don't
Mhm.
change, right? And that's why the circumstance doesn't change it, or the situation doesn't change it. Those things may be in that
Mhm.
dilemma, but again, we don't change the principle based upon that case.
Mhm.
The principle guides the case. The principle guides the decision. The principle remains always the same.
Mhm.
And that's what's important in these kind of moments. So and to many people that are outside of the Catholic fold, and maybe outside of the Catholic institutions, Colleen, don't always understand why the church is so intentional in her voice, and why sometimes very ungiving, if you will, like many people will define it, unyielding in its position. I think today we have articulated the very reasons for that,
Yeah.
and that we will never shy from,
Mhm.
and because these are great goods that can never be violated, and no matter what the circumstance is. And with that, to anyone in our audience and those that may come to this later, that are not listening to someone shares it with them,
Mhm.
is the sensitivity. Go back to Bishop Burbage, which is the church. Bishop Burbage did not articulate something the church does not articulate: the sensitivity, the care, the compassion, the accompaniment. And what I would say to President Trump, if given that opportunity, would be is we need to invest, which is goes back, I'm going to put my comma, to John Paul, comma, who says that we should be investing in technology that assists couples to help them achieve pregnancy morally. We have not done that consistently, and I think that to me is what I would challenge the president on.
What are those treatments that we have then? I see you have the list in front of
Well,
you of
I
what
have a
some of those
couple of
are.
them, and so I'm going to turn just to a couple of them if I'm going to find my little page here. All right. So these are just some of the things that, again, back to what could be used. And so if we look at the issue, and you've already mentioned it, so natural family planning.
Mhm.
So like the Creighton model, or the different methodologies that can be used to help a couple, particularly
Mhm.
a woman, but a couple, all right, because the sexual act is only to be shared between a husband and wife.
Well, it helps a woman understand her fertility
Correct.
better so that then she and her husband are more
That's
likely to
correct.
achieve
That's
pregnancy
correct.
within
And what we've
marriage.
seen through the use of natural family planning,
Mhm.
that couples that were not able to conceive
Mhm.
actually are able to conceive.
We have so many stories in the mission field. Like Emil in Tanzania is just like training. I think it's 1,000 women per month
Yeah.
that he's teaching natural family planning or fertility awareness to. And a lot of them are women that have been on birth control or having
Right.
fertility issues because of years
Right.
of birth control use. And Emil is able to help them figure out, okay, this is like there is an issue here.
Right.
Okay, if I change my diet, if I like heal these underlying
That's
issues,
correct.
I can like heal what's going on with my fertility,
That's right.
and now I'm able to achieve pregnancy. Also, now I have a better undererdstanding of what my fertility looks like.
Exactly, and the beauty of God's design
Mhm.
within this, and it's very beautiful, because I was in Tanzania, just putting a little comma, with Emil, and actually visited several of these wonderful little clinics that have
Mhm.
been set up within the region to help couples, and particularly women, to
Mhm.
understand, but help couples understand the beauty of God's design. And
Mhm.
it's a beautiful, beautiful. And you mentioned health. It is proper food, good food, underlying issues. So another one that is, as I mentioned earlier, that's out there, trying to address underlying issues, is microsurgeries. So if you look at the idea, there could be, again, maybe we're dealing in like one of the issues that might be dealing with is treating endometriosis itself.
Mhm.
But the microsurgeries might be able to identify something that is preventing, the egg to make its way down the fallopian tube, or
So,
it
what
could
would
be.
be an example of a microsurgery?
So it could be, for example, the issue of the I'm thinking here of within the man himself. It could be
Okay.
something with the the way that the sperm is not able to make its way through. It could be something hindering it. It could be something that's causing those difficulties. And the microsurgery obviously is dealing with something very, very delicate, very, very
Mhm.
small. And so that's just one thing that just come into my mind. But
Could it also be like a damaged fallopian tube?
correct.
Okay.
So
Or
the
like
or something
cysts?
within, like the cyst, it could be
Okay.
something. And so again, you're dealing with such a delicate is you have to be able to protect that environment. So,
Mhm.
but that's a possibility there. Also, we're looking at, I mentioned the use of ovulation or fertility drugs,
Mhm.
but properly. That's a
Mhm.
very, very important subject there. And people can, I know that you can give that link because there could be like we see with IVF, where drugs are given to produce more and more eggs
Mhm.
so that they can gather more of those eggs. And that could be very harmful to the woman's health in the
Mhm.
long term. So that's something, very important there. But that has a different intention,
Mhm.
but it's good to
Probably a different
understand.
dosage as well. Like, you wouldn't
Right,
wanna, like, hyper ovulate. You would want, like, to
right.
stimulate helpful ovulation
Right.
without.
Hyperovulation it can be very dangerous and very
Mhm.
harmful and cause many other issues in our
Yes.
health. And so, but the other one is, for example, like helping with sperm production,
Mhm.
boosting it. So using some types of medication that would be assisting that as well. And again, on our own website, we do
Mhm.
give some links that actually broadens the conversation. I was looking up on the National Catholic Bioethics Center, and
Mhm.
they actually move a couple of other ones. So for example, here, tubal damage,
Mhm.
occlusions. There could be something that's happening within the fallopian tube itself. It could be something that's going on with the cervix.
Mhm.
That oftentimes, and by just kind of, you know, uh, not addressing these, you
Mhm.
know, doesn't get to the systemic reasons why she's not able maybe to
Mhm.
carry a child to term. Maybe there's miscarriages happening too, which again, very painful. So outside of, all the IVF issue, the pain of loss of a child, all right, through no fault of the couple themselves. Sometimes they don't understand what could be happening. It could be something within the uterus. It could be the environment of the uterus, something that's hormonally not balanced. It could be the cervix that maybe has been damaged or
Mhm.
maybe is not functioning properly. There are techniques. I remember hearing some of our doctors on our board, Dr. Marie Anderson, who's been working in this field of assistance and of helping couples, but also with Dr. Prokowski and, delivering so many babies, and talked about, sometimes there are certain techniques that need to be employed to help plug the cervix, to
Mhm.
help it, to hold a pregnancy. So, but again, these are the things that don't get addressed, if we're just going to run toward IVF. These are things that could be dealt with.
There's also low tubal ovum transfer where
Right.
that's where the egg gets moved past a damaged part of a fallopian tube
Correct.
so that then the next time the couple has intercourse, the egg could be fertilized,
Correct,
correct?
correct.
Okay.
And there could be, again, with mobility, there could be ways of
Mhm.
helping the sperm. So prior to a conjugal act, and again, the danger with all of this, as I saw you smile, and that is sometimes, in the desire and want of begetting a child, sometimes we can employ, some of these techniques that almost kind of become mechanical,
Mhm.
and there is always that little balance that has to
Mhm.
be sought. That, again, we're not performing an act. This is really about the union, the love between a husband and wife. And so as we employ these, it's always trying to keep that healthy balance in mind and heart and in act, so
Mhm.
that they're all working toward a moral good and an immoral end in a situation. So, and people who are not familiar with, there could be other techniques that begin to develop. As I mentioned in my article, there have been many advances in genetics, many advances in understanding, the whole process of development and the whole. It's beautiful to see what science has been able to achieve. So it's important for us not to just toss it to the side and go after something that that's not immoral, IVF,
Mhm.
pardon me, and that also really in the end doesn't actually help the couple, as we know from the percentages where these things do not result in a child being born into this world.
Well, and also IVF is really expensive. And some of the things we were talking about were I was looking up some of the costs beforehand. I didn't do any sort of great research. It was like typing it into Google. How
Right,
much does
sure,
this cost?
sure.
But
Right,
like in general, it's going to cost the same or less than IVF is what it seemed like. And then because IVF is often done many times, some of these like microsurgery, it's a one-time surgery.
right,
So even though that cost might be similar to what an IVF cycle would cost, a woman who's going through IVF may do IVF two,
right,
three, four times,
right.
and the person with microsurgery is going to do it once.
Right,
So just again, turning this back to if you were going to pitch to President Trump alternatives, maybe if you subsidize something like helping women understand, like teaching natural family planning to women, fertility awareness, like
right.
not
Mhm,
again,
mm,
though like people can use it for contraceptives, but not
right,
that. But teaching women about their cycle, helping women obtain the drugs that are going to help them
right,
like ovulate, or helping men obtain the drugs that are going to help boost sperm production
right,
or things like that. You're gonna reduce government spending, like, it's gonna be cheaper than
right,
funding IVF, and it's gonna be generally effective, and you're not giving money to, like, the big IVF industry, you're
right.
helping people
That's right.
heal those underlying issues, so just I guess this is my hope
Yeah.
that people will pitch
Well,
to
well,
Trump.
you bring up, I mean, this point is very important, and that is that it's in a similar way. They're not the same, but similar in the sense of our argument for this is help using government funds to help pregnancy care centers,
Mhm,
maternity homes, to helping those very systems and programs and activities that actually promote good, sustain a great good, and and not and don't cost human life. Right? Abortion is not ever an answer. In the situation here, why don't we take those fundings that are coming from taxpayers and invest, going back to John Paul's quote, and invest in finding method and helping lower health cost,
mhm,
lower insurance premiums, and making more clinics available. One of the things, like with NAPRO technology, again, I know you'll put the link in there to explain what that is, but many times, we've encouraged doctors to be trained, through
mhm,
in this, but many times it's because of the financial difficulty, the time involved, the getting access, to the institute to be able to go through the proper training, so that we need to really also create opportunities,
mhm,
and not have it some remote, because in some regions, and this is a big challenge. I even say to our bishops, that promote these great goods,
mhm.
but in some dioceses, in some regions, there's no access to these great opportunities because of the clinics don't have it, the hospitals don't have it, there's no
I
doctors interested in it.
I honestly wonder, and I would be really interested in knowing how much the popularity, the mainstream nature of the IVF industry has detracted from pursuing, like, having more, like,
Right,
NAPRO technology made more widely available, of having these things become more mainstream. Because, like, that it's just it's interesting because, like, again, it big pharma, big IVF, or whatever, like, there's a very lucrative industry that benefits off of people
right,
staying infertile. And it would be really important to be able to invest in the, like, people that are helping women heal the underlying
that's
issues
correct.
instead.
That's right, and again, it still connects, to the
Mhm,
other moral issues. Abortion, so basically with abortion being in the mindset,
mhm.
then it becomes the go-to place,
Yeah,
remove it, it's no longer the go-to place, so what replaces it? All right?
pregnancy care
Right,
centers.
exactly, and care of individuals.
Mhm,
If we take euthanasia off the table, what becomes the response? All right, so you pull IVF off the table, you start
mhm,
pulling all these immoral practices that are there.
mhm,
What is the response? And so we do a tremendous amount of research in cancer research,
mhm,
and rightfully so. We do a tremendous amount of money toward other research on other illnesses, and understandably so. So that why we're trying to promote healthy people and help people who are facing medical dilemmas.
mhm,
You know, we take for granted, heart transplants today. We take for granted many of the other interventions today that are morally permissible and sound, right? But in this area, we spend very little in really trying to get to those systemic issues. So I think we really have and this is again to those that will have a chance.
mhm.
Who knows? Maybe you'll get invited, Colleen. Maybe I'll get invited to sit at a table and to talk about some things that maybe people don't want to talk about.
Yeah,
But hopefully that will happen.
mhm,
So I just want to support what you just said, and I would like to see it grow in our nation, because I've been in all 50 states, all right? I mean, I've been in 92 countries around the world, and I see it with my own eyes when there is a lack of opportunity that people are looking. So if all they have is IVF availability,
Mhm.
where do you think they're going to head, right? If that's all they're told about,
Mhm.
all right? And there's no other means, no other possibilities, and no one, including within the church, if our pastors don't talk about this, if our catechists don't talk about this, and those working with sacramental formation of our couples don't talk about this,
Mhm.
then they're going to hear it from somewhere else. And what they're going to hear is not the moral path. So there's a tremendous opportunity, which goes to what you said earlier, that this is as a bad subject,
Mhm.
you know, but a subject that now has gotten to the headlines.
Yeah.
And this is our chance to keep talking about it and not lose the narrative. And part of the reason why we're having this trouble is we've kind of lost the narrative,
Yeah.
right? Because people don't see, all they hear is no. They don't see the good that the church is advocating for.
Well, and that was also one reason I wanted to talk about the alternatives to IVF because I think, again, like I was saying, it's really easy to say no to IVF, but what can you say yes to?
Right.
Obviously, having children is a great good.
Mhm.
Healing underlying fertility issues is a great good. So it's good to know that there's options out there for couples who are
Right.
struggling with fertility.
And
So,
I would say just maybe in some of the final thoughts is, and repeating what many have said within
mhm,
the church itself, especially Bishop Burbidge in his pastoral, is we need to pray for couples who are struggling with infertility
yes.
and pray for those that have not only struggled with infertility, but may have conceived and through have had miscarriages, and
Mhm,
there's been no explanation of why these things are happening.
mhm.
It's a painful, it's hurtful, it's these are their children. So we have to really, it's a chance for us as a church to also talk about it.
I also want to say I saw people online who were saying things like the only people that use IVF are women who are on birth control and didn't conceive and put it off. And no,
No,
there are so many
correct.
women who want to conceive, who didn't necessarily wait till they're 39 to get married. Not like that's a bad thing, but like
Right,
you can't just paint this picture that the only people that want IVF are these selfish women who put their
right,
careers ahead of everything else,
right,
waited to get married and aren't able to conceive. No. There's
right.
many women of all walks of life who get married at all different stages,
Exactly.
who are like faithful to the church, who are struggling with infertility
That's right.
and might feel that that's their only option and
That's
obviously
right.
that is not the correct option, but like I just it really bothered me when I saw
Sure.
faithful people painting this image of
Right,
those terrible old feminist hags who want to use IVF to have a child after
right.
they've wasted their life, and
Right. No. And it's
that's
interesting
not.
because even here at HLI staff,
Mhm,
and our affiliates and directors around the world, I mean, I I'm not going to name them, but I mean,
mhm,
they have struggled. Many of them have struggled with infertility, and what I would recommend, and we've talked about it here, and we actually have it in our bookstore. Dr. Marie Meany, writes about the what she calls the cross of infertility, and many others have addressed it in this way.
mhm,
Pope Benedict used to talk about this as well, just this cross, this heaviness that one carries. And so it's important that what you just said is we need to be sensitive, compassionate, and even though even sometimes maybe we do come across people that maybe chose means over the years, maybe some bad pathways, but now come to the realization, I can't, I want to change that direction,
yeah,
so we have to be really, and that's what I loved about Bishop Burbidge's pastoral, because it is pastoral.
yeah,
It's promoting a truth, the good, and what is beautiful, which is pastoral. They're not so it's as we deal with this, even sometimes as Pope Benedict said, and the church teaches, even after this great litany that's in front of me, and in front of you, that are morally permissible, and I get to the end of all of those opportunities, and I am still unable to conceive, that there lies the cross. And so how do we help couples in those moments? And as I've said before, you've said before, adoption is something I would want people to consider, but not all people are called to adoption, even though I like more people to consider it.
mhm,
And because a couple is unable to conceive, doesn't mean they have to move toward adoption. People, I'm saying, is to pray, is to be open, to bring it before the Lord in prayer, to discern it, not to exclude it, not to dismiss it so easily. Again, not all people are called to it, and the reason should not just be because we're infertile, all right, or that we just want to adopt more children.
mhm.
It really needs to be prayed about, discerned, thought through, reflected on, but again, not dismissed. So, and the last thing I would say on that with regard to that is calling, even within the church, in our own Catholic research centers, to really look at how we invest, in the various research, uh, programs.
Surrounding
Right.
fertility.
Are we dealing with this? And I know we are, because I mean, I meet them, but I would love to see more. And I would love to see, again, more funding within the church, even her own funding in the sense of what she is advocating for, as well as in the federal funds, if they're available without any attachments to them. And that is to fund what Pope John Paul talked about. Help couples, right? Help them.
Make America fertile again.
So that might be a good phrase.
Well,
Morally,
fertile again.
husbands and wives.
Thank
Yes.
you, Father, for
You're
this
welcome.
conversation. It's been really good. Hopefully, it was helpful for our audience. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section. And Father, thank you for this conversation.
Thank you. Look forward to the next moment.
I look forward to it as well. And to all of our listeners, please give us like this show, give us a follow, leave a comment, like I said, or leave us a review, and keep on living the culture of life. God bless.